The summer of 1815 found England breathing again, though her breath came shallow and strained. The cannons at Waterloo had fallen silent, yet their echoes lingered in the hearts of men who had stood too near the thunder. Among them rode Adrian Blackmore, Duke of Harrogate, hero, aristocrat, and reluctant survivor. His name had been spoken with reverence in Parliament and whispered with admiration in London drawing-rooms, yet when he crossed the threshold of his ancestral estate in Yorkshire, he felt only the emptiness of a man unmoored from purpose. The rolling fields of Blackmore Hall stretched before him like a painting rendered in muted tones, grand, orderly, and lifeless. He dismounted without ceremony. The servants who greeted him spoke softly, as if uncertain whether to welcome or pity their master. His mother, long buried, had been the last to fill these halls with warmth. Now, portraits of stern ancestors stared down at him, mute witnesses to a lineage obsessed with duty. The Duke's valet laid out his uniform for cleaning, its scarlet coat stained with mud and blood from the continent. Adrian's eyes lingered on the epaulets, and for a fleeting moment he could smell the smoke of the battlefield, hear the screams of horses, the abrupt silence when a man fell. It was not glory he brought home, but ghosts. In London, the world was already preparing to dance again. The Prince Regent had declared the end of the long war an occasion for renewed pleasure, and society, ever hungry for spectacle, obliged him. Amid the swirl of new gowns and powdered wigs returned Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, daughter of the late Viscount Whitcomb, a family proud but modest in means. She was not the most beautiful woman in London. Beauty there was in abundance, but hers was the kind that left a mark, clear-eyed, curious, and unafraid to meet the world's gaze. Where other young ladies rehearsed coquettish smiles, Eleanor read novels and asked questions at dinner parties that made older men shift in their chairs. Before the war, she had known the Duke. Their acquaintance had not been planned. It had bloomed in the shaded gardens of Bath during one summer's visit. He had been newly titled, newly burdened, a man whose sense of propriety outweighed his ease. She had found his reserve intriguing, and he, in turn, had discovered in her an intelligence that stirred him more than any flattery. They had spoken of art and politics, of Byron and Burke, of the fragile state of the world. There had been no promises, only the faint tremor of possibility. Then came the war. He left without farewell, and her letters, full of restrained affection, went unanswered. Now, 5 years later, he was home, but the man who returned was not the one she had known. Adrian reappeared in London that winter, as if emerging from exile. At his first ball, conversation stopped when he entered. The war hero, the Duke whose calm had steadied his men under fire. His broad shoulders, his measured bow, his cool courtesy, all bespoke power. Yet his eyes gave him away. They were the eyes of one who had seen too much and resolved to see no more. Eleanor watched him from across the room that night, hidden behind a fan she scarcely needed. He danced once, briefly, with a cousin of the Earl of Pendleton, then withdrew to the edge of the crowd. Their glances met for the smallest instant. In that moment she knew he remembered her, and he knew she still cared. But when she approached to offer congratulations on his safe return, he bowed with impeccable formality and spoke words that might have been addressed to a stranger. "It is a pleasure to see London so well adorned once more, Lady Whitcomb." His tone carried the chill of winter stone. That single exchange became the unspoken tragedy of the season. She did not pursue him again, and he, though he thought of her more often than was wise, refused every impulse to bridge the distance. He told himself it was mercy, that she deserved a man unbroken, a man who could still sleep without hearing the crack of muskets in his dreams. Each time he saw her name in the guest lists printed by the Morning Post, he felt the faintest tug of longing, followed by the stern rebuke of conscience. In private, his friends spoke of him as a man of purpose. He had begun to take an interest in Parliament, sponsoring bills to aid returning soldiers and their widows. He visited veterans' hospitals in London's outskirts, his generosity quiet but unrelenting. Yet even in his benevolence there was a kind of penance. Each wounded man he met reminded him of those he had failed to save. Each widow's gratitude twisted the knife of guilt. When he returned to Blackmore Hall, it was not peace he sought, but the safety of isolation. For Eleanor, the years that followed were years of quiet endurance. Suitors came and went, drawn by her grace but unsettled by her candor. She found solace in charitable work, organizing relief for war orphans, supporting the education of young girls who might otherwise vanish into drudgery. The Ton found her admirable, if a little too earnest. A good woman, they said, which in London society was faint praise for one still unwed. Yet Eleanor had ceased to measure her worth by invitations or prospects. She told herself that love, if it had ever been meant for her, had been buried somewhere on the muddy fields of Belgium along with the laughter she once shared with a certain duke. When next they met, it was by accident. A reception at Lord Pendleton's house drew half of London's nobility. Eleanor had come reluctantly, coaxed by a friend. Adrian had been invited out of obligation. As the orchestra struck the opening notes of a waltz, she turned and found him standing but a few paces away. Conversation faltered between them, as though the years had conspired to erase every word they might say. She offered the faintest curtsy. "Your Grace," she murmured. His reply came low and steady, "Lady Whitcomb." The air between them seemed alive with everything unsaid. Their host, noticing the tension, cheerfully urged them to dance. It might have been crueler had Adrian refused, but he did not. He extended his hand. She placed hers upon it. The music began. For the length of that waltz, they moved together in perfect time, speaking not a word. To those watching, it was a picture of composure, two figures bound by grace and restraint. But within each beat of the violins lay 5 years of silence, regret, and questions neither dared to voice. When the music ended, Adrian released her hand as if it burned. He bowed once more, his jaw set. "Forgive me," he said softly, though for what, she could not tell. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Eleanor stood motionless, her pulse still racing to the rhythm of the waltz. She did not see him again that night, but she would remember the look in his eyes, an expression of longing so fierce it seemed carved from pain. Outside, carriages rolled away under the pale London moon, their wheels whispering over the cobblestones. Inside, the music resumed, and laughter rose once more. Yet for two hearts marked by pride and memory, the evening had left a wound that refused to close. And though neither could name it then, the course of their lives had shifted. Something fragile had broken, something precious that neither duty nor decorum could repair. The war had ended, but the battle between love and silence had only just begun. 5 years slipped quietly through the corridors of English society, softening memories but sharpening regrets. Time, that most polite of thieves, stole from Adrian Blackmore his youth, his ease, and the comforting illusion that solitude was a form of strength. The Duke of Harrogate had become a fixture of Parliament, precise in speech, impeccable in attendance, and utterly detached in spirit. He was admired by ministers for his discipline, feared by opponents for his intellect, and pitied by those few who guessed the price of his composure. His estates flourished under his management, his reputation gleamed untarnished, yet within him stretched a barren expanse no public virtue could fill. The war was over, but the peace he craved had never come. Each morning he rose before dawn, riding across the moors until the chill wind blurred the world into colorless mist. The rhythm of the horse beneath him was the only pulse that steadied his mind. He told himself he did not think of her, but her image persisted like sunlight behind a closed door. He had left Eleanor Whitcomb to the mercy of time, believing she would forget him, as was sensible, as was safe. Yet he found himself scanning every society column, every charity report, for mention of her name. She appeared often enough, the Lady Whitcomb who funded new schools, who hosted readings for widows of soldiers, who walked through London's poorer districts without escort or fear. Society had begun to speak of her with a curious blend of admiration and caution. She was no longer the blushing girl who had once awaited his letters. She had become a woman of consequence. Eleanor, for her part, had learned to wield independence as both shield and weapon. The fortune her father had left was modest but wisely managed, and she used it with purpose. She refused 3 proposals in those 5 years, one from a baronet who desired her name, one from a poet who desired her dowry, and one from a viscount who desired her silence. She did not seek romance, nor did she deny its absence. What she missed was not affection, but understanding, a companionship that could meet her mind without shrinking from her honesty. The Duke had once seemed such a man. She told herself that illusion had died long ago, but when she dreamed, it was still his voice she heard, speaking words he had never said. The London season of 1820 began beneath a sky of clear blue and whispered expectation. The Prince Regent's health was failing, yet his appetite for grandeur remained undimmed. Invitations flooded Mayfair for a succession of balls, concerts, and dinners that would rival any before. Among the new names ascending through gossip and grace was Lord Henry Wycliffe, a marquis recently returned from the Continent. He was 30, intelligent, and possessed of a charm that seemed effortless. Unlike most men of rank, Wycliffe spoke to women as though their opinions mattered. He admired Eleanor not for her beauty, though he acknowledged it, but for her conviction. He praised her charitable work, attended her lectures, and offered his company without presumption. London decided swiftly that he would propose, and the ton delighted in anticipating their union. Eleanor accepted his attentions with composure, though her heart remained cautious. She found in Wycliffe a kindness that soothed, but not the spark that consumed. He made her laugh, and she appreciated the ease of their companionship, yet somewhere deep within, she sensed that affection without ache might not be love at all. Still, she wondered if serenity might be better than passion, if a steady flame might outlast the wildfire that once scorched her. Adrian first heard of Wycliffe while dining with Lord Pendleton, an old comrade from his regiment. Pendleton spoke lightly, unaware of the blade he twisted. "Fine fellow, this Wycliffe. The ladies adore him. I'm told Lady Whitcomb finds him most agreeable." The Duke had lifted his glass with steady fingers, though the wine trembled. He smiled in the practiced way of men accustomed to concealing ruin. "Then I wish them both contentment," he said. But that night, sleep fled him entirely. He rose before dawn and stood by the window, watching the pale horizon bloom over London's rooftops. It was absurd, he told himself, to resent another man's happiness. Yet his chest burned with a pain he could neither name nor master. Weeks later, fate, or cruelty, placed them in the same room again. A dinner at Lord Bedford's house, intimate but splendid, brought together half of Parliament and the cream of fashionable society. Eleanor arrived in pale blue silk, her hair swept back to reveal a pearl at her throat. Wycliffe escorted her, his manner protective yet relaxed. Adrian entered late, the murmurs of conversation faltering as his title was announced. When their eyes met, the years between them collapsed into a single breath. She inclined her head with calm civility. He bowed, as form required, and took his seat at the opposite end of the table. Throughout the evening, his mind betrayed him, catching on the tilt of her smile, the cadence of her laughter, the unstudied grace of her movements. Eleanor, though outwardly serene, felt a tremor beneath her calm. Seeing him again was like touching a scar one had long accepted but never ceased to feel. The sight of him, severe in black, handsome still, yet shadowed by restraint, unsettled her far more than she had expected. When Wycliffe spoke beside her, she smiled automatically, but her attention drifted back to the Duke, who avoided her gaze with almost painful precision. Every gesture of his restraint felt like accusation, as if her composure somehow wounded him. After dinner, the guests dispersed into adjoining rooms for music and conversation. Eleanor found herself near the pianoforte, where a young lady began to play a soft nocturne. The melody stirred memory, the waltz they had shared long ago, the unspoken apology that had lingered between them. She turned slightly and saw Adrian watching her from across the room, the expression in his eyes unreadable. Then Wycliffe approached, bowing lightly before offering his hand. "Lady Whitcomb, may I have the honor?" She accepted, and they stepped into the adjoining salon for a dance. To onlookers, they were a picture of grace, the poised philanthropist and the gallant marquis. Yet from his place near the hearth, Adrian watched the scene unfold with a composure that cost him every ounce of strength. Her laughter reached him across the hum of conversation, bright and effortless. He realized, with a clarity that cut like steel, that she had built a life without him, and worse, that she might be happier for it. When the evening ended, Eleanor turned once more toward Adrian, intending to offer a polite farewell. But he was already gone. Only the faint scent of sandalwood lingered in the air where he had stood. In the carriage home, she sat in silence, her gloved hands folded in her lap. Wycliffe spoke gently of the evening's amusements, but she scarcely heard him. The memory of the Duke's eyes, dark and wounded, would not release her. Adrian rode home through fog and rain, the city lights dissolving behind him. Each hoofbeat echoed the accusation of his own cowardice. He had thought distance a virtue, now it mocked him as cowardice disguised as honor. In refusing to risk his heart, he had condemned it to ruin. Yet even as regret consumed him, he could not summon the courage to undo it. The season pressed on. London continued to glitter, its endless procession of carriages and chandeliers hiding 1,000 quiet despairs. For Eleanor, days became performances. For Adrian, nights became reckonings. Both moved through their circles with impeccable grace, each haunted by the same question neither dared to ask, whether love once buried might ever breathe again. And as spring yielded to summer, whispers began that the Marquis of Wycliffe would soon make his proposal. The world waited for her answer, and somewhere in the shadows of his own making, the Duke of Harrogate waited too, afraid to speak, yet more afraid of silence. The night of the royal celebration arrived with a splendor only England could conjure when determined to forget its weariness. Carlton House blazed with 1,000 candles, their light caught in mirrors and chandeliers until the air itself seemed spun from gold. Carriages lined Pall Mall in glittering procession, the sound of wheels mingling with laughter, hooves, and violins leaking through open windows. Inside, the Prince Regent's birthday ball unfurled like a pageant of power, ladies in gauze and jewels, gentlemen in silk and metals, each face arranged in its finest mask. Among them, two hearts prepared for collision, though neither knew what words or ruin might follow. Adrian Blackmore entered late, his arrival quiet yet instantly felt. The Duke's presence drew attention the way a storm alters the air, subtly, irresistibly. His uniform of midnight blue bore the insignia of honor he never mentioned, his expression as unreadable as ever. Yet beneath the composed facade, turmoil brewed with the slow inevitability of thunder. He had not seen Eleanor in 3 months, though her name had haunted every whisper of society. Tonight, rumor insisted, the Marquis of Wycliffe would finally declare himself. The thought had hollowed Adrian through and through, yet he came, compelled by something stronger than pride, perhaps penance, perhaps a final act of surrender. Eleanor arrived soon after, radiant in ivory silk embroidered with silver thread. Her poise was effortless, but within her pulse quickened with the unease of a woman standing on the edge of change. She had resolved that this evening would bring decision. Wycliffe deserved clarity, and she, at last, deserved peace. Yet when she stepped into the ballroom and saw Adrian across the expanse of marble, her certainty wavered. 5 years had passed, but his presence still carried the gravity of unspoken things. He looked older, perhaps sterner, yet something in his gaze, some raw flicker behind restraint, struck through her composure like light through glass. Music swelled, violins sweeping into a waltz. Wycliffe, courteous as ever, bowed before her. "May I claim this dance, my lady?" She smiled, though her voice faltered slightly. "You may." Together they moved to the center of the floor, drawing admiring eyes as they began their turn among the glittering crowd. The Marquis danced well, his touch gentle, his conversation soft. Yet as Eleanor's gown brushed the floor, her eyes, against all reason, sought Adrian's figure among the throng. He stood near a marble column, still as stone, his glass untouched, his gaze fixed upon her. To those around him, he appeared merely contemplative. But within, the Duke's world cracked. Watching her, laughing lightly at some remark, her head tilted toward another man, was agony of a kind he had not known even amid war. Pride, that old and faithful guard, faltered. He saw her not as the woman he had denied, but as the life he had forfeited. For 5 years he had told himself she was better without him. Now he saw only how empty virtue became when it cost the heart everything. The orchestra reached its crescendo, and in that precise instant she bowed before Wycliffe, graceful, luminous, utterly beyond his reach. Something inside Adrian broke. The glass in his hand slipped, shattering against the floor. A hush rippled outward as servants hurried forward, but the Duke barely noticed. He turned and strode from the room, the hum of conversation swelling behind him like distant surf. Eleanor froze mid-turn, aware of the commotion but unsure of its cause. When her partner followed her gaze and murmured, "It seems his grace is unwell," her pulse stumbled. Without another word, she excused herself, her heart already leading her steps through the gilded corridors. She found him in an antechamber beyond the ballroom, his hands braced on a table, head bowed. The candlelight gilded his profile, sharp with pain. For a moment she hesitated, uncertain whether compassion would wound him further. Then she spoke, her voice low. "Adrian." He looked up at once, and the sound of his name in her mouth seemed to undo him. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he exhaled, the breath ragged. "You should not be here." "Perhaps not," she replied, "but I could not watch you suffer alone." A bitter smile touched his lips. 5 years I have done little else. She took a tentative step closer. "Why, then? Why such silence?" He turned from her, as though words themselves might shame him. "Because I am a coward dressed as a gentleman. I told myself you deserved peace, that my ruin would not touch you if I kept my distance. But I have lived without peace, and you—" his voice broke. "You have haunted me more faithfully than any ghost." Eleanor's heart trembled between anger and pity. "You speak as if I were some memory, not a woman still standing before you. You wounded me, Adrian. You made me believe I was nothing to you." He faced her then, and for the first time his composure truly shattered. "Nothing? You were everything I wanted and everything I feared to need. The war taught me that love is a promise death delights to break. I thought to spare you grief, yet I see now I spared myself only happiness." Silence filled the chamber, heavy and tender. She regarded him with eyes bright as tears. "You do not spare me by denying what is true. You only condemn us both." He stepped closer, uncertain, as if nearing a sacred thing. "Tell me, Eleanor, does he love you as I do? Does he see you not as ornament but as air itself?" Her breath caught. "He offers me kindness, constancy. And yet—" she faltered, then lifted her chin. "I do not love him. I wanted to, but my heart will not obey reason." A faint, incredulous laugh escaped him, half joy, half despair. "Then it is not too late." She shook her head, though her eyes softened. "It may be. Too much has passed between us. Society forgives many things, but not a woman's indecision." "Let them speak," he said fiercely. "I have worn the armor of pride too long. Tonight I would rather be ruined beside you than revered without you." For a moment neither moved. The faint strains of music drifted from the ballroom beyond, a reminder of the world still turning. Then she reached for his hand, and he caught it, his touch reverent, trembling. The years of silence between them dissolved into that single contact. It was not passion that consumed them now, but the deep, aching recognition of two souls who had finally ceased pretending. After a time she withdrew, her expression calm though her pulse raced. "I must return before they notice my absence," she whispered. "If anyone should ask, say only that I congratulated you on your recovery." He nodded, struggling for composure. "And what shall I say when they ask of us?" She met his gaze steadily. "Say nothing. Let them wonder. For once, the truth belongs to us alone." She turned then, the soft sweep of her gown whispering against the marble floor. At the doorway she paused, glancing back only once. "Do not vanish again, Adrian. If I am to choose, I would have all truth before I do." He bowed his head, unable to speak. When she was gone, he remained standing amid the flicker of dying candles, his heart both broken and alive for the first time in years. Outside, the orchestra struck another waltz, and laughter swelled anew. Yet to Adrian, the sound was distant, unreal, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Some said later that the Duke of Harrogate left London soon after that night, retreating once more to his northern estate. Others claimed Lady Whitcomb's carriage was seen travelling that same road before spring's end. History records neither their reunion nor their parting. What endures is the memory whispered in drawing-rooms and written between the lines of letters never sent, that for one brief night beneath the chandeliers of Carlton House, two hearts long divided laid down their pride and remembered how to beat. And whether their story closed in union or in silence, the world would never quite forget the Duke who broke down when the woman he loved bowed to another man.